Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of For What It's Nerd. We had two finales this week, both Star Wars' Mandalorian Season 3 and Star Trek's Picard Season 3. The finales of those both being this week. Very, very interesting that they actually did fall in the same weeks, because these two shows are similar in a lot of ways. They're both kind of the pioneering, the big the shows of their franchise, so to speak, the ones that everyone talks about, the ones that everyone hypes up, the ones that everyone is interested in. Obviously a little bit different with Star Trek because Discovery was first, but Picard is the kind of flagship, or was the flagship like franchise, like show, like the project that was at the forefront. Mandalorian was slightly different again because Mandalorian was the first proper Star Wars show, and in live action, and that was quite big in and of itself, and obviously thus it became the flagship of Star Wars television. But these shows both deal with legacy concepts of their franchises, deal with new aspects of their franchises, and I think they go about it different ways, but they both have sort of very, very similar goals and similar kind of wins and drawbacks, I'd say. For example, as a small comparison, the cameos across these two seasons, the two shows this season, the narrative building, the introduction of characters that we have not seen for some time, in one way or another, was good. For example, as like a nice little throw-out point. Oppositely, the way in which villains were used across these two shows was bad, let's say. For example, Mandalorian, I feel, brings back Gideon too often and with too much of a one-dimensional aspect to his character. I won't go into too much details, as it is still these two shows are still relatively fresh, but generally speaking, Gideon as a character, when he returns to the screen each season, it is with little to no building of character. It is with little relevance to the plot there beforehand, and with little relevance to Mandalorian himself, because it seems like his goals are always far beyond that of Din Djarin. Oppositely, the same thing has kind of happened with the Borg in Picard. This one is slightly a bit of a spoiler, but I can't talk about it otherwise. Especially season 3, I was very Picard season 3 went through a lot of stages. Its first few episodes were quite, what's happening? Let's get on with it. Let's get somewhere here. Then we learned that the changelings are involved, and it gets very exciting. It's like, oh wow, we haven't seen the changelings since the Dominion War. This is a very interesting, nice way to revitalize these characters, this faction, so to speak. Let's see where that goes. And then they get supplanted by the typical, the one that's used all the time, the one that's forever, at the forefront of anything to do with Jean-Luc Picard, the Borg. And don't get me wrong, the Borg are a cool villain. The Borg are one of the preeminent villains of Star Trek, especially after the Klingons become part of the Federation / alongside the Federation. I get it. I get that that is the easier route as it goes for a big villain. The Borg are the ones that will never be part of the Federation, so to speak. Will never be they're the ones that will always come back in some sort of way. I get it. It's like the Cybermen or the Daleks in Doctor Who. That's the level that they are on. They will always come back in some sort of iteration. And that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a villain that always recurs, so to speak. I think, like, for example, the Daleks are a good example of that. The Cybermen too. These kind of infinite swathes of enemies that just are bad guys. They're just bad. They have no redeeming qualities. I think sometimes it's good to have villains like that. The Sith are essentially that too in Star Wars. And so the Borg have a place. I'm not saying that, but I think what really rubbed me wrong about the Borg becoming the end piece of Picard Season 3 was that A, they had been the past two seasons in some role or another, and B, that it supplanted the changelings. And I thought the changelings were really interesting. It was really interesting to see the return of another of these bigger species that were against the Federation. I think it would have been more interesting to see that carry through to the finale. Maybe deal with some different things going on there as regards, bringing in some Deep Space Nine aspects or something like that. But yeah, I think these seasons missed some potential in some regards, sadly. Oppositely, though, I will say that Mandalorian did this worse, if that makes sense. I feel like Mandalorian really just didn't know where it was going. I feel like Picard, for all its, everyone survives, everyone gets out kind of thing. Again, sorry, spoilers, slight spoilers. But I think that was kind of always expected. Most of these things end up with everyone surviving. I think, how do I put it? I think despite Picard having an ending that was expected, at least it had that ending that was expected to charge towards. It feels like Star Wars had an ending that maybe necessarily, Mandalorian, should I say, had an ending that wasn't necessarily expected, so to speak. It wasn't, no one might have went, that is exactly how this episode is going to go. But I think the issue is that Mandalorian is dealing with higher concepts than what Mandalorian himself is, Din Djarin is. And that causes a lot of friction between wanting to do this higher storytelling, which Star Wars is known for. Star Wars is a saga. Star Wars is space opera. Usually means big big adventures, big, I keep saying swathing at the moment. Big swathing, however you want to say it, adventures. Big spanning. That's probably the better word. Spanning adventures, and that doesn't fit wholly with Mando at points. And I think that is part of it. But I also think it's because they didn't want to commit to a story with any bigger stakes than what was already on the table, if that makes sense. I feel like they wanted to. They could have made Mando feel like a fish out of water in a bigger pond, so to speak. But they kept the pond the same size, but then tried to imply it was bigger. Does that make sense? I know that maybe sounds crazy to say, but they kind of made a galactic threat out of Gideon, but he has never been that kind of threat. He isn't that sort of threat. He, like the Republic part, especially of this season, with them implying that something is back, and then kind of intimating that it's Gideon throughout the show, when we know that the First Order is really what's coming eventually. It plays Gideon as this bigger character than he actually is in the Star Wars universe, even what they've played him as previously. He is a despot, a warlord. He's not anything huge. So I think in that way, Mandalorian is kind of a fish out of water. At least Picard knows what it's doing and goes for it. And yes, it's trite, and yes, it's kind of been done before. And yes, it's like, the final fate of humanity against the Borg. It's done. It's been done. It's contrived. But it plays up to the stakes that it is, that these characters have been on missions like this before against characters like the Borg Queen, against, the annihilation of Earth. Mando is, let's reclaim this planet, and suddenly there's a base there that this guy is creating clones of himself to make into Force. It's too much. Like I'm trying not to get the spoilers, but it's like it's so benign. And I just think Mando has outgrown itself. It needs to either grow with itself, so to speak, or finish. And I know a lot of people are saying that kind of season 3 seems like a good point for Mandalorian to end. We all know that season 4 will happen. We all know that Din Djarin will at least show up in a Mandalorian movie that Dave Filoni is helming. That isn't just Mandalorian, it is Mandoverse, but he will show up in that, likely. I feel like the issue that happened was, and I think this is where both of these shows had issues in a way. Each wanted to for Picard, it was, we want Jean-Luc back. We want to see Picard again. And that was all they really got to before they got Patrick Stewart on board, and then they started throwing together ideas of where they wanted the show to lead, so to speak. Oppositely, Mandalorian was, we want to get into the sphere of TV. Let's do a show about a Mandalorian. That'll be fun. People like Mandalorians. And then they didn't think about where they would be heading with it. And the same happened with the sequel trilogy, is that they didn't know where they were going. And because they don't know where they're going, or because they don't have an idea of a potential point they might go to, they fail. Because storytelling isn't just about going with the journey. Storytelling, you know, a lot of people say that the journey is as important as the destination. But you do have to have a destination in mind. And I think a lot of franchises these days, and this is more of a broad sweeping analysis of franchises in general, don't have that. I think a lot of franchises now just go with it and just think, yeah, this will fit, and it doesn't end up working. And you come across the issues in the second or third movie where things don't fit, things aren't rectified. For example, one thing with Picard that I did find interesting, and this is one of the things I find that Picard didn't wrap up. Picard didn't wrap up either Jean-Luc's relationship with Laris, not even a scene at the end, which is weird to me because that was like the big plot point of season 2. And then on top of that, didn't deal with oh gosh, I've forgotten it as soon as I was going to say it. Didn't deal with Wesley Crusher, which is he showed up literally in season 2, implied some great fate that was coming for one of the characters. I forget, was it I think it was it Soji? Not Soji herself, but the version of Soji that existed in that timeline. I forget exactly, but essentially the idea being that that Wesley Crusher was around. They talked about him in season 3, and then they didn't have him be present at all, and that is very weird to me, considering the reunion of almost everyone else in this episode / season. I get it, I suppose, but it is a weird one. I don't know. I just think these shows have ideas, grand designs, and then don't think them through fully and don't round it out properly. I know you can't do everything. I get that. It's impossible to do everything. That's what these shows are about. But it's very weird when a show references characters such as Wesley Crusher, or, for example, Admiral Janeway, who they talked about numerous times in the season, and then didn't have Kate Mulgrew show up, which, frankly, I think she probably would have very, very willingly. She's very Star Trek friendly, so to speak. But I think the same is true of Mandalorian. There's these moments where you think this would happen, or this should happen, or maybe this would be better. And yeah, we're fans, and yeah, we don't sit in a writer's room, and yeah, it's then our job to decide how Star Wars is going to go, or Star Trek is going to go, or any of these franchises is going to go. But it often feels like these franchises go for the path of least resistance rather than building something interesting or different or new. They like to go for familiar. I think, I don't get me wrong, I think fandom causes a bit of this issue, because I think fandom on some level expects the familiar, but I think any enterprising, interested storyteller wants something new, wants to go where no one has gone before, to boldly go where no one has gone to before, to put it in Star Trek terms. And I think you have to. I understand there's corporate pressure, and I understand there's executive pressure, and I understand there's just general concern about making a product that is viable. But I think the way that some franchises are becoming means that you will never see characters die. You will see characters continuously, repeatedly used in every single piece of media. Ahsoka is a big part of this in Star Wars. The Borg seem to be a big part of this in Picard. Like, let's build new aliens. Let's build new threats. Let's build new ideas. Like, the Borg were new at some point. So was Q. So was Palpatine. Palpatine wasn't always a part of Star Wars. The Emperor was always there. The Empire was always there. But Palpatine wasn't properly introduced, really speaking, until, Return of the Jedi. Before that, he was a hologram, a fleeting moment in Empire Strikes Back. And so I think these franchises need to get out of their stupor of rehashing everything and look to new stuff. For example, Star Wars at the moment, High Republic. I think the High Republic is one of the most successful things they've done in a while, because what it does is, and yes, it doesn't always hit the note, it doesn't hit exactly, and some of the characters are a bit trite, and that's everything. You're always going to have characters you don't like. You're always going to have characters you do like. You're going to have concepts that hit. You're going to have concepts that miss. But the High Republic tries, and the Nile as a concept, as a villain, are wholly different to most things in Star Wars, but interesting, and still imply, a dark force in the galaxy of Star Wars. And I think Star Trek is the same. The change. That's why the changings were interesting to see return, because the changelings had one go around. The Borg have had many go arounds. I mean, even in Picard, they've had 3 go arounds, 3 different iterations of Borg, across the shore, should I say? And then never mind the Voyager Borgs, or never mind the Borg in the movies, or never mind the Borg that showed up on that one episode of Enterprise, the last Star Trek, but the chronologically earliest Star Trek show. I just think there's a point where you need to think of new ideas and new concepts, and I think that people need to also be receptive to those new ideas and new concepts. I suppose what I'm trying to say on the root level is that these shows are good. They're not bad. They're not. There's enjoyable parts. There's enjoyable things. There is new. There is new on some level. There is old on some level, and Legacy is good. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say cut out Legacy. For example, Star Wars is moving towards creating essentially one of the oldest storylines in fiction of the Star Wars universe in live action, which is good. But I think that's the issue. I think that's one thing that they haven't done up to now, is look at what they have and do something concrete with it. Everything has been kind of all over the place. This time they're looking at a story from a media source that they have had since it was written, generally when people didn't know if Star Wars was going to continue, or etc. When Thrawn was at the front of Star Wars as a villain, they have that story to pull on, and they're going to try it, and I hope that works. I can see how it might. Thrawn is an interesting character, and I'm very excited to see Thrawn in live action and all that stuff that's coming with Ahsoka. But I hope they know that they need to do that well, and with the idea of legacy in mind, but not being rooted to it. You need to have a bit of flexibility, and I think these shows and these franchises aren't being as flexible as they should be. Again, I know obviously there is corporate, parts to this, corporate ideas in that, and concern that they're not making a viable product. I will kind of re-echo that, but I think these shows, these franchises, they need revitalizing in some kind of true, interesting way, or they need to be put on pause. It's okay. We don't need. I think this is the thing that people think, is that we need everything from every franchise all the time, continuously. I think it would be okay if we didn't have. Star Wars movies, for example, they had a break, and now when we get a new one, we'll be excited again. We'll enjoy going to the cinema to see a Star Wars movie. And yeah, it might not be the best, but it'll be that nice break that everyone kind of needed. And I think that could be said for streaming shows and generally franchises in general. Not to repeat myself a little bit there. But yeah, overall, I think these two shows are successful in their own ways and do have success in them, and do have interesting moments and heartfelt moments and well written moments, and not so obviously again, and all the opposite of that, the negative side, the not so well written moments, the trite, and that's most shows. That is most shows. I think these guys average out in the sort of 6 to 7 range at the end. Earlier on, I think there was better episodes, there was worse episodes, as it goes. But I think these are decent shows. These are good shows. Just I think I want more. I want not more in the sense of more episodes or more shows or more characters or more time. I just think more effort to be something new, more effort to be something else, more effort to say, yeah, we're doing this season 4 or this next thing or these things, but we're doing it with this in mind. And I hope that becomes more of a staple going forward. I feel like we're kind of entering, and have been entering for a while, sort of this creative and instinctive creative aversion to creativity, an instinctive aversion to cookie cutter mentality. And that has been around for a while, but I think it's getting worse. And I'm really hoping we don't sink too far into it, because you could see these franchises really start to just fall down into maybe disrepair that doesn't really come back from. Because, once these franchises, like, for example, Picard is the swan song of Patrick Stewart, we don't get that again. And similarly with William Shatner, he likely won't return to Captain Kirk now, etc., etc. You go on; these people are aging out of these roles, and with that, franchises can potentially die and be done, so to speak. And there needs to be some smartness involved with keeping these franchises afloat if they're going to live past the next few generations, because they might not. And that's okay in the general sense. Certain things become dead, so to speak, or past their time, and that's allowed. That's okay. That's natural. But if you want the story to be ever evolving, to have ever new parts to enjoy, then you need to look at how you are going to do that. I'm not a big Harry Potter fan, for example, but being able to say, hey, you know what? Actually, despite there being these very successful movies, we're now going to try doing it as a TV show. That's innovative. That's a little bit different. That's exciting in its own sense. Likely, I probably won't watch it because, again, I'm not a big Harry Potter fan, and there's a lot of other issues surrounding that, which I don't particularly want to go into right now because that's not the aim of this video. But political is maybe the wrong word, but moral stances, etc. But I think there's a lot to say as regards that, and as regards trying something new and trying new ideas and stuff. And Star Wars has tried that a little bit with TV, and I think Star Trek is trying that with its other shows like Strange New Worlds and Discovery. I just wish they tried that a little bit more in certain areas. I think I've made myself relatively clear what I'm saying, but I hope it comes across that way, and I hope it's not seen as a big detraction from what these shows are or what they mean or what really they have achieved, because they have achieved well. I just think they could achieve more. Thank you guys, as always, for listening / watching, and I'll see you next week for another episode of For What It's Done.